Boss fired me for being too poor for the company. When he found out who my father really was, he begged for forgiveness. My name is Alex Chen, and this is the story of how my carefully constructed ordinary life came crashing down in the most unexpected way, revealing truths I'd spent years trying to escape. The perfect facade. For 3 years, I had been the model employee at Sterling and Associates, a prestigious consulting firm in Manhattan. I arrived early, stayed late, and delivered results that consistently exceeded expectations. My colleagues knew me as the quiet, hard-working guy who brown-bagged his lunch and took the subway, while they grabbed expensive salads and called Ubers. I had crafted this persona deliberately. After growing up in a world of privilege that felt more like a gilded cage, I wanted to prove I could succeed on my own merit. So when I graduated from business school, I changed my last name from Chen Blackstone to just Chen, moved to a modest studio apartment in Queens, and took an entry-level position at Sterling using only my academic credentials. My father, Jonathan Blackstone, was one of the most powerful venture capitalists on the East Coast. His firm, Blackstone Ventures, had a portfolio worth billions and influence that reached into every corner of corporate America. But I was determined to build my own path, free from his shadow and the expectations that came with the Blackstone name. The new boss. Everything changed when Richard Hawthorne was promoted to managing director of our division. Richard was everything I'd grown up despising about the business world: entitled, arrogant, and obsessed with appearances. He came from old money, never missed an opportunity to mention his Harvard MBA, and seemed to believe that success was determined by the price of your suit rather than the quality of your work. From his first day, Richard made it clear that he intended to elevate the caliber of our team. He instituted mandatory team dinners at expensive restaurants, organized client meetings at exclusive golf clubs, and began scrutinizing everything from our clothes to our conversation topics. Image is everything in this business, he'd say during staff meetings, his eyes inevitably landing on me when he talked about maintaining standards befitting our clientele. I tried to adapt. I bought a few better suits, though still from department stores rather than custom tailors. I attended the dinners, even though they cost more than I wanted to spend. But it was never enough for Richard. The humiliation campaign. Richard's disapproval of me became increasingly obvious. During presentations, he'd interrupt me to ask where I'd bought my tie, as if my clothing choices were more relevant than my analysis. He'd schedule important meetings at venues that required expensive dress codes, then act surprised when I showed up underdressed. The breaking point came during a client presentation that I'd spent weeks preparing. The client, a tech startup looking for expansion funding, was impressed by my research and strategic recommendations. As we wrapped up what I thought was a successful meeting, Richard pulled me aside. "Alex, we need to talk," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "Your presentation style isn't quite what our clients expect from Sterling and Associates." In front of the entire team and several clients, he critiqued everything from my discount store briefcase to my inappropriate questions about the startup's actual business model rather than their networking connections. "Our clients invest with people they can relate to," Richard continued. "People who understand their world, their values, their lifestyle. I'm not sure you're equipped to represent that image." The final straw. The humiliation campaign culminated 3 months later during our annual performance reviews. Despite my consistently strong results, I'd brought in more new clients than anyone else on the team. Richard gave me a barely satisfactory rating. "Alex, you're a hard worker. I'll give you that," he said, leaning back in his leather chair. "But effort isn't enough in this business. Our clients want to work with people who reflect their own success. They want to see ambition, sophistication, a certain pedigree." He gestured at my off-the-rack suit and second-hand briefcase. "I'm sorry, but I don't think you're the right fit for where this company is headed. We need team members who can seamlessly integrate with our high-net-worth clientele. People who don't have to pretend to belong in exclusive circles." The words hit like a physical blow, not because they were entirely wrong, but because they were partially right. I had been pretending, just not in the way he thought. "I'm recommending your termination, effective immediately," Richard continued. "It's not personal, Alex. You're just too poor for the trajectory we're pursuing. The aftermath. I cleaned out my desk in stunned silence while my colleagues avoided eye contact. 3 years of hard work, exceptional results, and client satisfaction meant nothing because I didn't drive the right car or wear the right watch. As I rode the subway home for the last time as a Sterling employee, I felt a familiar rage building, the same anger that had driven me to reject my family's world in the first place. But something else was building too, a desire for justice that had nothing to do with my hidden identity and everything to do with the principle of the matter. I spent the weekend updating my resume and reaching out to contacts from business school. I wasn't ready to reveal my true background, but I also wasn't going to let Richard's classist dismissal go unchallenged. The phone call Monday morning, I was preparing for job interviews when my phone rang. The caller ID showed my father's office number, something that hadn't appeared on my phone in over 2 years. Alexander? My father's assistant, Martha, sounded worried. Your father needs to speak with you urgently. It's about Sterling and Associates. My blood ran cold. Had someone discovered my real identity? Alex, my father's voice was carefully controlled when he came on the line. I just got off a very interesting call with James Sterling himself. Apparently, his new managing director, Richard Hawthorne, has been making some questionable decisions about personnel. I said nothing, knowing my father's style well enough to wait for the full picture. James called because Hawthorne approached Blackstone Ventures about a potential investment opportunity. During their meeting, Hawthorne mentioned that he'd recently cleaned house of employees who didn't meet the firm's new standards. He specifically bragged about firing someone named Alex Chen for being, and I quote, too poor and unsophisticated for our elevated clientele. The irony was almost laughable. Richard had unknowingly boasted to my father about firing his own son. James was appalled, of course, my father continued, but what caught his attention was the name. He remembered meeting you at my birthday party a few years ago before you decided to go incognito. He put two and two together and realized that Hawthorne had just fired a Blackstone. The revelation. The next part of the conversation revealed the true scope of the situation. James Sterling, the firm's founder, had been looking for reasons to rein in Richard's increasingly problematic behavior. Several clients had complained about Richard's arrogance, and there were whispers about potential discrimination issues. James is furious, my father explained. Not just because of who you are, but because he reviewed your file. Your performance ratings, client feedback, revenue generation. You were one of their top performers. Richard fired you purely based on classist prejudice. My father paused, and I could hear the weight of years in his voice. Alexander, I know you wanted to make it on your own. I've respected that choice, even though it's been difficult to watch you struggle unnecessarily. But this isn't about your heritage anymore. This is about basic human decency and fair treatment. He was right. This had transcended my personal journey of independence. Richard had created a hostile work environment based on economic prejudice, and he needed to face consequences. What do you want me to do? I asked. James is handling it internally, but he wants to meet with you, not as my son, but as a wronged employee who deserves justice. The meeting. 2 days later, I sat across from James Sterling in his corner office, the same man I'd known as Uncle James during childhood family gatherings. He greeted me with the warmth of an old family friend, but his expression was serious. Alex, I owe you an apology, he began. Not for Richard's actions, those are entirely his responsibility, but for not maintaining better oversight of my managing directors. What happened to you was unconscionable and completely contrary to everything this firm represents. He slid a folder across the desk. I've completed a full investigation of Richard's tenure. What I found was disturbing. You weren't the only employee subjected to his economic prejudice, just the most egregious example. He created a pattern of discrimination that could have destroyed our reputation and exposed us to serious legal liability. The folder contained documentation of Richard's behavior toward multiple employees, client complaints about his attitude, and evidence of several potentially discriminatory hiring and firing decisions. Richard will be terminated immediately, James continued. But I want to offer you something more than just vindication. I want to offer you his position. The confrontation. I asked James for one favor. I wanted to be present when Richard was fired, not for revenge, but for closure, and to ensure he understood exactly why his behavior was unacceptable. The next morning, Richard was called into James's office for what he thought was a routine meeting. When he saw me sitting beside James, his face went through a range of emotions: confusion, anger, and finally smug satisfaction. "James, if this is about reinstating Alex, I have to advise against it," Richard began confidently. "As I explained when I met with Blackstone Ventures, maintaining our firm's prestige requires difficult decisions about personnel who don't align with our clientele's expectations." James's expression remained neutral. "Richard, I want to make sure I understand your reasoning for terminating Alex. You stated it was because he was too poor for the company's trajectory?" "Exactly," Richard said, warming to his theme. "In this business, perception is reality. Our clients need to see themselves reflected in our team members. Alex, while hardworking, simply didn't have the background or sophistication our clients expect." "I see," James said quietly. "And you felt comfortable discussing this personnel decision with potential investors?" "Of course, Jonathan Blackstone appreciated my commitment to maintaining standards. He understood that sometimes leadership requires making tough choices about cultural fit." James looked at me, then back at Richard. "Richard, I'd like you to meet Alexander Chen Blackstone, Jonathan Blackstone's son." The color drained from Richard's face so quickly I thought he might faint. "You see, Richard," James continued, "when you bragged to Jonathan Blackstone about firing his son for being too poor, you revealed something far more damaging than poor judgment. You revealed a fundamental character flaw that makes you unsuitable for leadership at this firm." The begging. What happened next was both satisfying and deeply uncomfortable. Richard's arrogance crumbled completely as the full implications hit him. He began stammering apologies, first to James, then to me, his voice rising with panic. "Alex. Alexander. I had no idea. If I'd known who your father was, I never would have. I made a terrible mistake in judgment about your qualifications. Please, you have to understand, I was just trying to maintain the firm's standards." "But that's exactly the problem, Richard," I said quietly. "Your standards had nothing to do with professional competence and everything to do with economic prejudice. The fact that you're only apologizing now that you know my background proves that you learned nothing from this experience." Richard turned to James, desperation clear in his voice. "James, please, I'll make this right. I'll reinstate Alex immediately, give him a promotion, anything. I just misunderstood the situation. I can fix this." James stood up, his decision clearly made. "Richard, you're terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and HR will contact you about your final paperwork. Your behavior toward Alex and other employees has been documented and will be part of your permanent file." As Richard was led away, still pleading for another chance, I felt no satisfaction in his downfall. His begging was pathetic, because it was based entirely on fear of consequences rather than genuine remorse for his actions. The choice. James offered me Richard's position on the spot, along with a significant salary increase and the respect that should have been mine from the beginning. But as I sat in that office, looking out at the Manhattan skyline, I realized something important about myself and what I truly wanted. "James, I appreciate the offer more than you know," I said finally. "But I think this experience has taught me something valuable about the kind of leader I want to be and the kind of company I want to work for." I paused, choosing my words carefully. Richard's behavior was enabled by a culture that prioritizes appearances over substance. While you're clearly committed to fixing that, I think I need to find my own path forward. James nodded slowly. "I understand, Alex, but know that you'll always have a place here if you change your mind. And regardless of where you go, you have my highest recommendation." The new beginning. 6 months later, I founded my own consulting firm, focusing specifically on helping small and medium-sized businesses access the kind of strategic guidance typically reserved for large corporations. I used my real name, Alexander Chen Blackstone, but built the company on principles of merit, accessibility, and genuine value creation. My father provided some initial funding, not as a gift, but as an investment in a business model he believed in. For the first time in my adult life, I felt comfortable accepting his help because it was supporting something I'd built rather than something handed to me. The most rewarding part of my new venture was hiring practices that prioritized competence over connections. My team includes brilliant people from diverse economic backgrounds, and their fresh perspectives have made us incredibly effective at solving complex business problems. The lesson: Richard's fall from grace became something of a cautionary tale in Manhattan business circles. Word spread quickly about the managing director who fired a billionaire's son for being too poor, and his reputation never recovered. He eventually left New York entirely, though I heard he struggled to find comparable positions elsewhere. But the real lesson of this story isn't about karma or revenge. It's about the insidious nature of economic prejudice and how easily we can mistake superficial markers of success for actual competence. Richard genuinely believed that expensive clothes and prestigious connections were more important than analytical skills and work ethic. His worldview was so distorted by classist assumptions that he couldn't recognize talent when it was sitting right in front of him. The epilogue: Today, my consulting firm has grown into a respected player in the industry, known for delivering results rather than maintaining appearances. We've helped dozens of businesses achieve sustainable growth, and our diverse team continues to challenge conventional wisdom about what successful professionals look like. I maintain a good relationship with James Sterling, who successfully reformed the culture at his firm after Richard's departure. Several of my former colleagues have reached out over the years, sharing stories of how the workplace improved once leadership prioritized substance over style. Richard never contacted me directly after his termination, though I heard through mutual connections that he eventually started his own boutique firm catering to exclusive clientele. The business struggled, apparently because his focus on appearances over results didn't translate well to actual client service. The experience taught me that hiding from privilege isn't the answer. Using it responsibly is. My background gave me opportunities that others don't have, and pretending otherwise doesn't help anyone. What matters is using those advantages to create value and opportunities for others, not to perpetuate systems of exclusion. Most importantly, I learned that true success isn't about fitting into someone else's narrow definition of what a successful person should look like. It's about creating value, treating people with dignity, and building something meaningful, regardless of whether you're wearing a $1,000 suit or a department store special. Richard's biggest mistake wasn't firing me for being poor. It was assuming that economic status determines worth, and that assumption ultimately destroyed his career while launching mine in a direction I never could have imagined. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's proving that their narrow worldview was wrong all along.